It's time now for Campus Talk, our weekly discussion with members of the College Fix editorial team. Today I'm joined by College Fix assistant editor Daniel Payne for a conversation about the broader implications of the campus bias reporting phenomenon. Daniel, you've been reporting on this. You've seen this in the news for a long time now. Give me a sense from your perspective. What drives universities to come up with these sort of Orwellian ways to censor kids' speech?
Yeah, what you've seen over the past few years is this increase in campus organizations and tribunals and committees that are designed to really sort of manufacture what they call bias incidents where none really existed before. So, you know, in addition to maybe actual incidents of real antagonism that you might find on campus, you'll have folks brought before these tribunals, for instance, for color coding a sign blue for boys or pink for girls. That has actually become an incident that can be prosecuted on a few campuses across the country. That's what you're kind of seeing, is this drive to make just about everything that a student could possibly do something that could offend somebody else and could thus be punished in some way. And you really, I think you see that impulse because they want to enforce this ideology. They're very interested in blanketing their campus with this political correctness, and they're really eager to find any way they can to do it. And it turns out that creating bias response teams and making everything into a bias incident is a really effective way to do that.
I love the word that you used, manufactured. This is completely manufactured. No longer are universities allowing kids to speak and then dealing with the 1 in a million incident where somebody has a genuine offense. What they're doing now is they are proactively trying to come up with all sorts of ways to tamp down speech. We've seen it not just with speech, but these absurd freedom squares, right? These little blocks of places on college campuses where you have free speech, that for 1 hour a day, for this little part of the quad, you're allowed to speak your mind. Although there's always a campus policeman standing right by to make sure you don't speak it too much. Well, from the perspective of being a student in education, I'm an educator, this really does cast a pall over any kind of free discussion in classroom. It casts a pall over the kind of books as a professor I can assign. If I'm assigning books that stereotype gender now, that deal with gender from a traditionally male-female perspective, then I'm already in the possibly in the middle of a hate crime. What do you see happening if we don't get a handle on this? And what can we do as faculty, as students, to begin to push back about this out-of-control administrations?
Well, yeah, and I can speak personally, too. In my own days as a student, which wasn't that long ago, I certainly felt nervous speaking up about things that under any other context would be considered non-controversial. Everything that I might say in class, I had to stop and think, is this going to offend somebody? Does this go against, progressive gender norms and that kind of thing? So you do see it really having a stifling effect on not just controversial topics, but everyday, run-of-the-mill things that people used to talk about with no concern. And I think that the way that I've become convinced over the years that the way to push back against this is to be really unapologetic about it. To not preface normal, inoffensive things with trigger warnings and apologies for whether or not this might offend somebody, but just talk, to be respectful and kind and considerate, but to be honest and open and be willing to engage in productive and sometimes difficult dialogue. To not back down from the student mobs and the bias response teams and every other thing that's designed to stifle speech. If you really kind of put your best foot forward and refuse to be silenced by this kind of machine, I think that's what's really going to turn the tide on this, because I think once they do start getting pushback, they're not going to know what to do.
I think that's a great point. It is. Certainly in the faculty and certainly in the student body, there is a very small but very vocal group of administrators and students who are constantly pushing this kind of thing. I always thought a nice thing that could be done as well is turn the tables on the hate crime reporting, the bias reporting. I mean, the fact that the people who are putting out these laws and rules are using words like patriarchy, which is completely a stereotype, using words like white privilege, right, which stereotypes. The argument is that we have to have these bias response teams to crack down on stereotypical labeling of people, of refusing to acknowledge people as anything other than the collective. That's exactly what these bias response teams are doing to begin with. They are guilty before the fact the minute they start to engage in this kind of behavior.
Yeah, I think, and holding up that mirror would probably confuse a significant number of them, to the point that they might just give up, because you do see among the ranks of these crusaders on campus a great deal of really kind of repugnant bias in their own right. So if you can actually turn the tables on them and sort of bamboozle them with their own silly ideology, that's probably a pretty productive track, I would imagine.
If we don't get a handle on this, if we don't take a common sense approach and fight back and get the students to be more comfortable speaking their minds, not less comfortable, where do you think this might go? What would be the next phase? We've seen over the last 20 years it started with the creation of these passive committees who just simply listen to students, to now activist committees that are trying to root out problems that haven't happened yet. If we're not careful, what's the next step?
You know, I think the next step is this steadily grows and gains more influence in the wider world and not just campus. I mean, you've seen the sort of diversity craze that really started on our college campuses. It's expanded to corporate America. It's expanded to television, to even sports television. It's really grown out of the campus and into the larger culture and economy. And I think that if this keeps getting worse, you are going to see more draconian things like bias response teams and like these mobs really gain more of a toehold off of campus and into the real world, so to speak. So I think rolling back that sort of apparatus is important, not just for colleges, but for everything else as well.
Daniel Payne, assistant editor at The College Fix. Thanks very much for your time today. And be sure to stay up upon all the latest news and information from The College Fix editors by joining us on our social media platforms.